Well, good morning, Golden Corner Church. And good morning to those of you who may be visiting with us. As always, it's good to see you all. Today I'm going to preach sermon number 11 in a sermon series that revolves around the life of a man named Joseph. When Joseph was only 17 years old, he had two dreams that proved to be of divine origin. Through those dreams, God gave Joseph kind of a peek into his future. According to God, Joseph would one day be a great ruler. And after 13 long years of suffering, it finally happened. God made Joseph's dreams come true. Joseph was put in charge of the country of Egypt, and with the exception of Pharaoh himself, everyone answered to Joseph. Last week, Tim pointed out that God is faithful right down to the smallest detail. In Joseph's dreams, God had revealed that Joseph's brothers would one day bow down before him, and wouldn't you know it, 9 years after Joseph took the throne, his 10 older brothers showed up in Egypt. They had come to buy grain. You see, there was a severe famine ravaging the entire region, and the only place where grain could be found is in Egypt. And when they arrived, guess whom they had to deal with? That's right. None other than Joseph himself. The Bible says that they bowed low before Joseph, just as God had predicted. Strangely enough, Joseph's brothers didn't recognize him. However, he quickly recognized them. For whatever his reason, he chose not to disclose his identity to them. The Bible said that he spoke harshly to them. Can you relate? Is that kind of what you think you might be doing? He spoke harshly to them. He said to them, I know who you are, I know what you are, and I know why you've come to Egypt. You 10 fellows are spies. And you've come to check out our land. And they're like, oh, no. We're just 10 ordinary guys, 10 brothers of 12. Our youngest brother is not with us, and we've got a brother who is no more. He said, no, you're spies, and he put them in jail for 3 days. 3 days, he put them in jail. He let them out of jail, brings them back in his presence, and he said, I've been thinking about this. There's a way that you can prove to me that you're just 10 ordinary guys and you're not spies. You mentioned you've got a younger brother who's home with your dad. Go get him. Bring him back. Let me meet him. If you can do that, then I'm going to accept your story. And so 9 of you are free to go. I'm going to keep one of you in jail. And he handpicked one of the brothers, a guy named Simeon. He had him tied up in front of the others and led away. And then the 9 brothers returned home to their father, Jacob. They told Jacob what had happened. And they said, here's the way this has got to go down. If Simeon's ever going to get out of jail, we got to take Benjamin back. Jacob said, that's not going to happen. That's never going to, you're never going to take Benjamin away from here. He was afraid that he might experience a similar fate as Joseph and never come back. He said, you're not taking him. What about Simeon? I don't care. Poor old Simeon. He's just kind of left hanging out to dry here. He said, I don't care. Well, Reuben spoke up, and this is what he said. One of the boys, his name was Reuben. Reuben spoke up and said, Dad, I'll tell you what. I understand your concern. Let me do this. Let me accept personal responsibility for Benjamin's well-being. He said, if he goes with us and something bad happens, I tell you what I'll let you do. You can kill 2 of my sons. Did you hear what he just said? Is that completely irrational? If something happens to Benjamin, I'll let you kill 2 of your grandsons. What? And now listen, if his sons were there listening to the conversation, they couldn't be feeling too good about it because Reuben had already lost 2 of Jacob's sons, right? He said, no, end of conversation, never going to happen. You got it? So they just left Simeon. Now they finished up their grain. Jacob looked at his sons and said, you're going to have to go back and buy more grain, or we're all going to starve to death. Judah, one of the sons, spoke up and said, I tell you what, fine. Tell Benjamin to pack his bags. He's going with us. Jacob said, no, never. Judah said, you know the story. The man said he's never going to deal with us again until we take Benjamin with us. So if Benjamin's not going, neither are we. And then Judah said, I'm going to make a proposal. It's time for you, Dad, to make a big, big decision here. You're either going to have to take a risk with Benjamin. You're going to have to risk the fact that maybe something bad would happen to him if he goes with us. Or you can accept the certainty of the fact that Benjamin's going to starve to death right here under your roof. And so will the rest of us, and so will you. So, what do you want? The certainty of starvation? You want to risk your son? Judah said, and here's what I'm promising you. I'll take full responsibility for his well-being. What do you think? Jacob said, let's give it a shot. So the 9 brothers go back and they take Benjamin with them this time. When they arrive in Egypt, they're told that you're going to be eating dinner tonight with Joseph at his palace. That's the word the Bible uses. Listen to me. You understand Joseph wasn't living in a bungalow out behind Pharaoh's palace. He didn't have an overhead apartment over Pharaoh's garage. He was living in his own palace. And so the brothers are told, you're going to be eating supper with Joseph tonight. And so they were taken to the palace and they were allowed to clean up. And then Joseph comes in and says, guys, I want you to be seated for dinner. And he looked and he saw Benjamin, and he looked at the 9 boys. He had released Simeon, brought him so that all the 10 brothers are there with the 11th brother, Benjamin. He looked at Benjamin. He looked at the boys and said, is that Benjamin? That's the guy you're talking about? And they said, yeah. Joseph excused himself, went out and found a private place where he broke down and wept. He was having kind of an emotional breakdown at the side of his brother. He comes back in, he seats them for dinner, and strangely enough, he seats them in the order of their age. That had to freak him out. And then he served them. And the Bible said he gave Benjamin 5 times what everybody else got. So if the other 10 guys got a chicken leg, Benjamin got 5. The other guys get a slice of pizza, Benjamin got 5. Oh, you want a glass of milk? Fine, here's a glass. Benjamin gets 5. They bought their grain. Joseph pulled one of his servants aside and said, I want you to do me a favor. He hands him a silver cup that somehow or another was identifiable as Joseph's personal property. He said, plant that in one of the sacks of grain that belongs to the youngest brother. I said, will do. He did. The next morning, they got up, the boys did. They loaded their donkeys. They start out of the city. Joseph leans over to his servant and says, go catch them and tell them that one of them has stolen from me. Got it. They caught the boys right outside the city limits, stopped them and said, we're going to have to search everything you've got, all these sacks of grains, we've got to search because one of you stole from Joseph last night. Of course, they began to object. There's no way. Are you crazy? They said, okay, that's fine. We're going to search. So they open up every sack, and all of a sudden they come to Benjamin's sack of grain, and they pull out the silver cup that belonged to Joseph. Got him. You're under arrest. You're all going back to stand before Joseph. You say, why would Joseph do this? I think he's testing the boys. I think he's testing them. to see if they've changed in the slightest, and he wants to see how they're treating his younger brother Benjamin. So they all come back, they stand before Joseph, and Joseph said, hey, it's really a simple fix. Whichever one of you stole the cup, and I believe that would be you, young man, you're going to remain here with me for the rest of your life. You will serve as my slave in order to make right the wrong that you have committed against me. The rest of you 10, you're free to go. Judah stepped forward and said, with all due respect, I need to say something before we leave. You understand, Judah was the one who initiated Joseph being sold into slavery. It was his idea. He took the lead. It was Judah who really initiated the 13 years of suffering in Joseph's life. He said, but before we go, I got to say something. "22 years ago, my daddy lost a boy. And for 22 years, I've watched him suffer and I've watched him grieve. I can't watch him go through that again. I gave him my word that I would watch after this boy." So he said, I'm going to ask you to do me and my daddy a big, and Benjamin, a big, big favor. Let him go. Keep me instead. Let him go. I'll forfeit my future. I'll forfeit my freedom. I'll forfeit the rest of my life. And I will serve as a slave in his place if you just let him walk. I think they've been changing. The Bible said the room was filled with Egyptian servants. And Joseph whirled around and said, clear the room. Everybody out, except for these 11 brothers. Everybody. I believe, man, they were scrambling. They were picking things up. And then the Bible said all of a sudden that the room was empty, just the 11 brothers and Joseph. And at that point, Joseph began to weep. Now, you got to understand, it wasn't just Joseph standing there with tears trickling down his face. I'm telling you, Jessica, he was wailing. He was in mourning. He was crying so loudly, the Bible said in other parts of the palace, the Egyptians could hear how he was crying. You say, Ronnie, what was going on? This is what I think. I think it was almost a volcanic eruption of emotions that had been suppressed and had been building for 22 years. Anger, self-pity, frustration, confusion. And I believe all of a sudden in this setting, all of that began to come to the surface in an almost violent way. I wondered what the 11 brothers were thinking was going on. When he gained his composure, he looked at him and he said something that none of them expected. He said, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? The Bible said, this is the word that's used, they were stunned. I'm talking stunned. It says they were speechless. They couldn't form words. I don't know if this is what I pictured all week. If you're a fan of the old black and white episodes of Andy Griffith, you remember the Darling Boys? You remember the Darlings? I pictured those 11 brothers looking like the Darling, just. He said, lean in, guys. Lean in. Boy, I thought I was about to go over that stage. He said, get closer, get closer. Listen to me. I'm Joseph, the one you sold into slavery. They obviously began to get upset with themselves. So Joseph began to calm them. He said, calm down. Don't beat up on yourselves. You need to understand. God used what you did to get me here. And He's the one who made me manager of Egypt, an advisor to the Pharaoh himself. So you need to calm down. And He said, I want you to do something. You go tell my daddy I'm alive. And you go brag on God and tell my daddy what God has done for me. And then you get him down here to me as quickly as you can. This famine's not nearly over. And my daddy's got a choice, starve or come here and let me take care of him. But I promise you, I'll take care of him. Scott, they must have just still been sitting there with that stupid look on their face. Because he looked at Benjamin and said, Benjamin, you see it, don't you? You know who I am. And Benjamin must have responded, affirming. I know, and all of a sudden, Joseph began to weep again. But this time it was tears of joy. And he and Benjamin, they embrace and they're weeping. They're celebrating. Then Joseph goes from brother to brother and they're weeping and they're celebrating. And then the Bible said after that, they were able to speak freely. I'm telling you, the tension was gone and it was a grand reunion of a dozen brothers. Word got to Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers are here. So Pharaoh called for Joseph. He said, man, we're just tickled to death about what has happened. And said, I'm going to do something. I've already got enough wagons ready for those brothers to go back to your daddy's house and get him and the rest of your family. And we've loaded 20 donkeys, 10 of them with nothing but gifts. 10 of them with all the supplies they'll need to get them home and get everybody back here. And this is what he said. I'm going to make sure that they're given the best land in Egypt. That's what he said, best. He said, I'm going to make sure they're fed the best food Egypt has to offer. And he said, tell them this, don't even worry about packing anything. Because when they get here, I'm going to make sure they get the best products available in the land of Egypt. Said it three times. He used the word best. I'm going to make sure they get the best. Man, he was true to his word. The boys, they take off, they go back, and they must have walked in the tent. I can see 11, they walk in together. He's relieved. Benjamin's there, Simeon's there. And they said, Dad, you better take a seat. Listen, he's 130 years old, right? You better take a seat. We got a story to tell you. Joseph is alive. And he's the governor that we've been dealing with in Egypt. What do you think Jacob said? Well, that's good. That's real good. You know what he said? That's too good to be true. What kind of a cruel joke is this? They said, step out in the yard, Daddy. Step out in the yard. Out there with all those wagons, all those donkeys loaded down, and said, how do you explain all that? The old man broke down and said, you get me to my boy. If it's the last thing I do on this earth, you got to get me back to my boy. So they started the journey to Egypt, and I'm telling you, Jacob must have been freaking out. I mean, this is a lot. Is this not a lot to try to absorb? And I think he was very confused, and I think he was, I don't know what was going on, but I do know this, that he stopped at a place called Beersheba, and the Bible said he worshiped God, wouldn't you? And that night, God spoke to him and said, don't you be afraid. I know there's a lot going on. There's a lot you don't understand, but don't you be afraid, because Just as I've been with you in Canaan, I'm with you right here at Beersheba, and I'm going to be with you in Egypt. I've orchestrated all this. And he said, one day I'll take you home. When I do, it'll be in a box. You're going to die there. You're going to die in Egypt, but your son Joseph will be sitting right next to you. And he'll be the one that closes your eyes. So they made their journey. They were looking for a place called Goshen. And so they couldn't pinpoint it, so he sent Judah to find Joseph and say, give us specific directions. Judah came back. They ended up in Goshen. They must have been setting up camp when word got back to Joseph. They're there. So what do you think Joseph did? The Bible said he prepared his chariot. And he struck out to find and be reunited with a son he hadn't seen in 22 years and thought he would never see again. I couldn't possibly begin to fathom the emotions that he was experiencing. I believe it was surreal to him. But he made it. I can't imagine what Jacob felt when he saw him. I can't imagine what Joseph felt, but I know this. The Bible said they locked up in an embrace and they wept together for a long, long time. Joseph took his family to meet the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh said, let me remind you of something, Joseph. They get the best. Fourth time he said, make sure they get the best. And the Bible said Joseph took it as his personal responsibility and made sure that they always got the best 5 times. The last 17 years of Jacob's life, he lived with his son Joseph, who took care of him. And made sure he always got the best. Now, I know it's a long story, but there's something I wanted you to notice. It's something about Joseph's life. Joseph's life was good. I mean, really good. He wasn't a slave anymore. He didn't have to wait on other people hand and foot. Donnie, he had a staff of slaves that waited on him hand and foot. Joseph didn't sleep on a cot in a prison cell under the ground. Joseph slept in luxury in a palace. He wasn't eating prison chow. He was probably eating the finest foods available in all of Egypt. He had a luxury chariot. More money than he could ever spend. He was wildly successful. Life was good. There had to be times when Joseph thought to himself, you know what? It just couldn't get better. And then it did. He was reunited with his brothers, especially his younger brother, Benjamin. And he was reunited with his dad. I'm telling you, things were good and they got a lot better. Now there's a lesson. There's a lesson I want us to learn in this little story. It's important. And it's important to a lot of you right now at this point in your life. You ready? Life ain't all bad. Now, some of you cringed at my English like, did he really say that? Well, there's a big lesson here in this story. And it's an important one. Life ain't all bad. From Joseph's story, we've learned that God will allow seasons of suffering in our life. During these times, we'll encounter difficult situations and difficult people. Our path will be littered with rejection, loss, disappointments, and pain. If it could go wrong, it does. Just when we think it couldn't get any worse, it will. During these seasons, life is not good. On the contrary, life can be really bad. However, life ain't all bad. Take a look at Joseph's life. The first 17 years of his life were good. Well, at least things were better for him than his 10 older brothers. Joseph's father, Jacob, loved him, and he gave him that cool coat that we talked about in some of the previous sermons. Even though Joseph was the 11th born, Jacob considered him the firstborn, so Joseph was in line to one day inherit a small fortune. That's all good. Then God allowed poor old Joseph to go through a season of suffering that lasted 13 years. That's right. For 13 long, lonely, confusing, painful years, life was bad. But ultimately, that season ran its course. And at the age of 30, Joseph's life was good again. And you got to agree with me, I'm talking about really good. Yes, some of Joseph's life was bad, but it wasn't all bad. As a matter of fact, most of Joseph's life was good. Joseph was 110 years old when he died. So apparently Joseph had 97 good years and 13 bad years. If my calculations are correct, that means that less than 12% of Joseph's life was bad and over 88% of Joseph's life was good. Or you could look at it like this. For every bad day Joseph ever lived, he was given 7.5 really good days. I don't know about you, but I'll take that deal. Sometimes life is bad, but life ain't always bad. Ronnie, what does this mean to me? Here's what I think it means to you. There are better days ahead. You know what I prayed all week? I said, God, when I get up there Sunday morning, I want to speak for you. I want to say to the people who are there what you have to say to them. And this is what he told me to tell you. There are better days ahead. As a matter of fact, a better way to put it might be like this. There are blessed days ahead for you. Some of you are currently in a season of suffering and life is bad and it's been bad for a long time. I know, but you got to know this. It won't always be this way. Why not? Because life ain't all bad. Just as surely as winter gives way to spring, as night gives way to morning, as storms give way to blue skies, bitter seasons eventually give way to blessed seasons. Would you think of all the biblical examples of this? Are you familiar with the story of Job? Hannah? Ruth? Naomi? David? Abraham? Sarah? And the list goes on and on. Better days are coming for you. And you can bank on it. You'll laugh again. You'll love and be loved again. You'll be able to rest at night again. You'll prosper again. If it can go right, it will. And just when you think life couldn't get any better, it will. Life will be good again. Because life ain't all bad. So in light of that, what do I want you to do? This morning there's something I don't want you to do. Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up on life. Don't give up on God. Don't give up on a dream that He placed in your heart or a calling that He's placed on your life. Don't give up today. because you have no idea what a morning is going to bring. Think about Joseph's story for a moment. His life suddenly went from good to bad. There was no warning. On a day like any other day, Joseph unknowingly walked into the most difficult chapter of his life. Life was good one day and bad the next. Then 13 years later, on another average day, just as suddenly as things had gone from good to bad, things went from bad to good. Really good. I thought about this morning. 4,745 mornings, Joseph woke up, looked at his life and went, it's still bad. 4,745 mornings he awakened, surveyed his situation, and said, it's still bad. It would have been so easy for him to give up, but he didn't. On morning 4,746, things changed dramatically for the good. What a difference a day made. Your bad days are going to turn into good days, and your bitter season will turn into a blessed season. You can write that down. That's going to happen. You ask, when, Ronnie? Well, perhaps tomorrow. Perhaps the morning light will usher you into a new season, a good season. Perhaps the morning will bring open doors, answered prayers, and fulfilled promises. Tomorrow might be that very day that life becomes good again. So please, 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 don't you give up today. I want everybody to bow their heads and close their eyes. I know that I'm talking to some folks who seem to be trapped in a never-ending cycle of difficult days. I know that. I also know that God sent me here today with a message for you, just for you. And that is that life's going to be good again one day. And I'm here to encourage you not to give up. Don't give up in the bad times. I know what you're thinking. Whew, that's easier said than done. I know that. I know what you think. Ronnie, I don't want to give up. I don't know how to keep going. You need something. You need God to do something for you that He alone can do. You need Him to give you something. We can call it grace. We can call it strength. I don't know what you call it, but you need Him to give you that so that you don't give up. You need Him to do that special something in you so that you can keep going another day. I know. And I want to pray for you before I let you walk out of here. There's nobody looking but me and God. You need me to pray for you? You need God to give you some grace and some strength and some help so that you can keep going? I want you to lift your right hand up and hold it up there for just a little while. Hold it up. Yes, 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 yes. Come on now, hold it up. Yes. I see them, man. I see them. I see those hands. You can put them down. The important deal here is that God saw those hands. He understands the request and the need behind that uplifted hand. Father, it's hard for us to do. We're going to do this morning. We're going to thank you for the bad times. Because in the grand scheme of things, you weave those into our lives just like you do the good times. We thank you for the disappointments. We thank you for the failures. We thank you for the rejection. We thank you for the loss. We thank you for the pain. We thank you because somehow or another we know that they have been extended to us from the hands of a good and wise God. But Lord, you know that we're only human. And God, there are people in this room that are so tired and so empty and so confused. And Lord, they need something that only you can give. They need that grace not only today, but for the remaining days that they're caught in this storm. They need strength that could come from the Holy Spirit who lives within them. They need hope restored. I don't know exactly what they need, but you do. And you can do it, and you can provide it. And I'm praying in the name of Jesus Christ that you will. Amen. Thank you for coming. Don't you dare give up today. You're dismissed.